Thanks very much, guys. So for those of you who were here last seminar, as Nick has explained, I have elaborated on that a bit more and did a little bit in regards to calories and distribution of your foods for a training day and non-training days, or less active days at the same time. So we'll go through that as well. But as Nick discussed, it's all about health and performance. A lot of people think when they need to do challenges that they need to eat the least amount of calories to be successful. And that's something unfortunate that is preached within the fitness industry. Hopefully by the end of today, you'll understand that fueling yourself is more important. And if you eat adequately and enough food, you're actually better for your metabolism, opposed to eating hardly anything, which unfortunately is probably what you've been told in previous years or exposure. So to give you a little bit of background about myself, Nick did do an introduction. So my company is a Sports Dietician Co. We deal with strength and conditioning athletes and recreational to elite standards. We don't necessarily deal with endurance athletes, not because I don't like endurance, it's just not my field of expertise that I like to help individuals with. So strength and conditioning can be anything from your HIIT classes, like what you guys are, to obviously, Olympic standards in terms of weightlifting, vice versa, track and field. So my team consists of myself, Gabby and Rose, which are all qualified sports dietitians at the highest level. And then Danny Guy is the co-founder and also co-director of Bite Right, which is the app that we've created to help you guys throughout the challenge. So hopefully towards the end when I go through that, if you have any concerns and questions, obviously we'll go through that in more depth. So get you guys have an understanding, the philosophy of my company, which is what I say to every individual. An athlete is anyone who wants to train or move, okay? So athletes eat and train, they do not diet and exercise. So that's the mentality that we want you guys to try and get across throughout this challenge, and also not even just through the challenge, but for sustainability, because most of the time when people do challenges, they have their befores and afters, and then they go back to eating just as shit as what they were before, or they're not as good in terms of their habits, okay? So with this, you'll never see us cutting out food groups, you'll never see us advising anything that's out of the medically necessary, unless you've been advised to do so, okay? There's a big difference. You don't need to cut out gluten unless you're celiac, or anything like that, or eating really low calories, or no celery juices, or any juices, period, to detox. It's not a thing, it's what your liver does. But we also want to make sure that everything that we're doing is simple and practical to what you're currently doing, and already incorporating that into your existing lifestyles. Understanding how your body works and processes is far more complicated than just eating the foods itself. And then always, with most things, guys, you want quality over quantity to make sure you have sustainability and health for that. So to give a little bit of background for those of you who may understand calories or may not. So calories is our unit of measure. So that's everything that you see when you see food labels on the back. In Australia, they like to make it really complicated and use kilojoules, which is just bigger numbers. I prefer calories. They do offer both, okay? So when you're looking at it, always think of calories because they're just a bit smaller numbers, easier to process. So when we're looking at it, all our foods and fluid that we consume contain calories, all right? So we have carbohydrates, proteins, fat, fiber, and alcohol, which is the one that many like to ignore. But carbs and protein means that per gram, they hold 4 calories, all right? Fats is 9, so that's double, or actually more than double. Fiber, you guys don't need to worry about too much because that's good for us, but that does still contain calories. It's 1.5 to 2.5 grams, and alcohol's is 7. So when it comes to gaining weight, losing weight, maintaining, remember if you're trying to lose weight, you need to be in a calorie deficit. So that means you need to be eating less than what you're consuming. If you want to maintain, obviously eat the same amount to what you're exercising, and if you want to be in a surplus in terms of gaining, you need to eat more than what you're exercising. The reason why I say this is because you'll get a lot of people who say to me, Taylor, I'm scared of carbs because they make me gain weight. Now, it's not carbohydrates that cause the weight gain, it's the excess calories coming from that carbohydrate that causes the weight gain, okay? The same thing can happen if you eat too much protein, same thing can happen if you have too much fat, same thing can happen if you have too much alcohol, okay? So it's not the actual macronutrient that causes the weight gain, it's the excess calories coming from that, all right? So all types of foods, like we said, are important sources of energy. All these types will fall into place into your lifestyle. Alcohol can still be incorporated into your diet at a healthy standard, and you can still lose weight if you're factoring it in, okay? So it's not about completely cutting things out. I don't want you to turn around and say, Taylor said I can have alcohol the entire time. That's what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is if you're a person who drinks quite regularly, it's stupid to completely cut it out. All right, it would make sense and be more healthy to do so, but is that sustainable if you're a person who's used to drinking every night? All of a sudden I say cut it out. All right, you're not changing a habit, you're just ignoring it and doing it before and after most of the time with challenges, okay? So it's about swapping it, not stopping it completely, because otherwise I'm setting you up for failure before you even start the challenge, all right? And also we want to make sure that we have a good variety of all these foods, not necessarily alcohol, but to make sure that you remain healthy, because each one of these macronutrients, if you cut them out of your diet completely, for example, when people cut out carbs because they decide to do keto or the carnivore diet, you're cutting out a lot of essential vitamins and minerals as well as fiber. So if you do that for a long period of time, you're going to have health consequences in your later years, or because you want to get leaner or less fat because you're doing a diet that's not sustainable long term. Okay. So when we break it down, guys, I'll go down into those a little bit of those macronutrients. So when we talk about macros, so carbs, fats, proteins, and alcohol. Macro means we need them, not alcohol, but macro doesn't mean we need them in bigger amounts, okay? So when we're talking about carbohydrates, a lot of people will slam carbs. It is not essential for our body to have carbohydrates, that is correct, but does that necessarily mean you should not include it? No, it just means we need to be smarter about how we utilize those carbohydrates. So carbs are our body's main fuel source. All right, so our brain, for example, needs 120 grams of carbs per day to function. So if anyone's done any type of study here, or they deal with numbers, or their job's quite hard in their brain, what do you guys crave? Probably sugar. Yeah, or something that gives you a bit of energy. That's because your brain still needs carbohydrates. And I used to have it all the time when I studied, that you want to go for a sugar hit, okay? But if you have consistent amounts of carbohydrates throughout the day to fuel your brain, you're less likely to have those energy slumps, all right? So when we're doing our training, it is essential for you guys to fuel yourself if needed. The amount of carbohydrates you need for a session and the varying sessions and the intensity of those sessions will obviously be dependent on the individual. So what I'm saying is, if you just come in to do your training and you really enjoy it, but you just like to move, you may not necessarily need as much carbohydrates as someone who's trying to smash themselves with a ski erg or the Airdyne to make sure they get the time trial that they need. Two different variants. Both of these goals aren't more important than the other. It's just about perspective. This person, I said at the start, not as much carbohydrates. This person needs more carbohydrates based on the demand of their exercise and the intensity that they're bringing to the training sessions every day, if that makes sense. So like I said, it's our main fuel source. It helps us sustain effort and pace. If you've ever done a session fasted and you're doing it for performance, you will notice you'll hit a wall. There's no way you're going to be able to keep up with someone if you're looking at the same fitness, right? Unless you're someone who's really fit, they're going to obviously be better than you. But if you look at someone who's exactly the same fitness as you within reason as a scenario, you've come in fasted, this person's come in fed, guarantee the person who's come with some sort of carbohydrates prior to that training session is going to outperform you. All right, and the reason why is because carbs aren't fully available all the time. So our body stores them, but when we do high intensity exercise, so roughly above 65% of your heart rate, your body's main fuel source is carbohydrates for your working muscles. Unfortunately, that doesn't last, and that's called lactic acid, all right? So when you're doing anything for sustained efforts, you get that lactic acid in your legs, particularly on Airdyne sprints, for example. That's just because your body can't keep up with the amount of fuel needed to sustain that exercise, and as a result, lactic acid happens, you need a rest. When we rest, our body does naturally reproduce our energy that we need for that training session to keep going. But if you have amounts of carbohydrates coming in, you're going to sustain that more effectively because you've fueled yourself for the workout ahead. Does that make sense? And it's also really important for recovery. Most of the time people finish their sessions here in the mornings, maybe not on Saturday because you might go out and get coffee and brunch. I can guarantee you most of the time when you guys finish your training sessions, all you care about is your protein, because you're like, oh, I'm just going to worry about my protein, carbs are the devil, so I'm not going to fuel myself. And then come 3 p.m. you're hitting that lolly jar. All right, because we also need to make sure that we're having carbs post-training to fuel you and to recover for the workout you've just done. So think of yourself as like a petrol tank. So obviously the petrol is your muscle glycogen, which is carbohydrates. So when we train, hopefully you've come in with a full tank of petrol, you had carbs the night before, you fueled yourself well, particularly for testing if you guys are doing that for your 6 weeks challenge. Then what happens is that petrol tank will go down, okay? So that's because your body's using your carbs from your stored muscles. What we want to do is next time you train or the next session, you want to make sure that petrol tank is filled up, because every time you're doing that, that petrol is lasting longer and your body's adapting to the training sessions you're doing. Because if you're doing it, like, I don't know if you guys are doing testing, and then in 6 weeks time, if you do some more testing and you haven't adequately fueled yourself, and you're like, why am I not getting fitter, faster, stronger? 9 times out of 10, it's got nothing to do with the programming. It'll always have something to do with your fuel, okay? Which is obviously what you feed yourself for that session. Carbs are obviously really important for prebiotic fiber, so for your gut health. So it's not just about fueling yourself in terms of carbs, fats, and proteins. The benefits of macronutrients go far more than just your macros. And then they help us sustain immune function without, getting sick all the time. So if you're a person who's constantly run down, you might be quite lean, you might not, doesn't necessarily matter, but if you're not fueling yourself effectively and your stress levels are quite high, you're going to notice you're going to be quite run down consistently. And that may be because you're not fueling yourself enough from a carbohydrate perspective. Protein is another macronutrient. Now this is essential, which means we need to have it from our diet, okay? Our body just can't produce it. Which means that, we have different types of protein without getting too complicated, but we have essential and non-essential protein. So protein is made up of amino acids, which is our protein blocks that we require. And those essential ones we need to have from our diet, and then non-essential our body does produce, but it doesn't necessarily matter too much in terms of the food that we consume with that, because our body doesn't rely on those non-essential amino acids as much as essential. So if you said to me, Tay, well, how do I worry about essential and non-essential? That's too confusing. If you eat a varied diet that contains both lean meats from animal sources and plant-based sources, you're going to be ticking those boxes, okay? So most of you would understand protein. When you think of that, you think of building muscle, which is correct. We need a certain amount of protein throughout the day to sustain our muscle mass. If you don't feed your body enough protein, you'll lose your muscle mass. So muscle itself is a bioactive tissue. It means it costs us energy for it to be there. The more muscle you have, obviously the more power you have, but you need to fuel your body to sustain that muscle. Hence, a great example is when you get injured, the first thing that goes is muscle mass decreases and fat mass increases, okay? So you do want to make sure that you're fueling yourself adequately throughout the day for that. It will vary with the amount of protein you require, depending on your size, your weight, your lean mass, and all that sort of thing, okay? Most of the time people eat too much protein and they don't eat enough carbohydrates. What will happen, and this is a great example when people say I'm doing a keto diet or a very low carbohydrate diet, and what will happen is you might be eating quite low carbs, but then you're eating a shitload of protein. Now the body's very smart, all right? You're not in a low carb diet, because what will happen is your body will turn the too much protein that you have into carbs, all right? So then you're no longer necessarily in a low carb diet, and you know what sucks? Is that excess protein that you've utilized is now going to be coming from your muscle mass. All right, so your body is very efficient at making things easier, and it's not as simple as, I'm eating this much protein, this much carbs, and my body is just working amazingly. It will do everything it can to reserve energy. So hence why too much protein isn't good, just like too much of anything isn't good either. So the dose is always the poison. So when it comes to your protein, obviously quality, quantity, and timing matters. The evidence suggests most of the time for individuals like yourself, you want to aim for anywhere between 1.6 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight of protein. So if you're looking at me, I'm 50, let's just go 50 kilos because I'm mathing the spot for the best. And I'm going for 2 grams per kilogram body weight because I do strength conditioning every day and I do CrossFit. That's only 100 grams of protein, right? You would be like, oh, actually, Tay, that's not a lot. Again, the dose is the poison. Too much isn't amazing, and just too little isn't the best either, okay? So you want to find that sweet spot, because once you do that, it's going to be easier to maintain. Not that you need to worry about those macros and everything, but it's just saying when you're looking at your food, particularly if you're a male, no offense, and you guys have protein and you're like, oh, Tay, but I have a 300 gram steak. And I say to you, you know what, this is for a 100 kilo male. And I'm like, okay, you only probably need half of that. And they're like, what, I have 150 grams of steak. And if you're like someone who likes their steak a lot, you're probably gonna laugh at me. But then I'm gonna say, well, why are you gaining excess fat? Or you have excess body fat continuously going on, because all you're doing is eating portion sizes that are way too big to what you need over what you desire, if that makes sense. So again, the amount of protein will be individual. When we're talking about protein, obviously we want to factor in plant-based and animal-based protein. So when we're eating animal-based protein, guys, we hit all our requirements for those essential amino acids. So what that means is an animal source already contains the threshold that you guys require to build muscle. Plant-based, on the other hand, you guys do contain amino acids, and they are essential, so you can get them from your plant-based, but it's harder and becomes more strategic. All right, so you need to pay attention to the types of protein you're consuming, because if you just eat, for example, rice, you're not going to have all your essential amino acids. So you see a lot of vegans or vegetarians pairing protein sources together. They'll go rice and tofu, all right? And that's then going to hit their complete protein requirements and amino acids. But then we've also got to factor in that you guys got more of an energy budget to deal with, because most of the time your protein sources also contain carbohydrates, all right? So you can still gain weight if excess amounts are consumed, not because it's got too much carbs, but because it's got too much calories coming in from those food sources. So you do want to make sure, obviously, from that factor, that you're paying attention to those requirements at the same time. So when we're looking at it, guys, if you said to me, well, how much protein do I need to have in one sitting? And the evidence suggests anywhere between 20, I put to 25, but if you're a heavier individual, you're looking at between 20 to 40 grams. All right, and the reason why we have those spectrums is because it comes down to a particular amino acid. So have anyone ever heard of branched chain amino acids before, BCAAs? Everyone drinks them in the morning before their training session because you think you're gonna put on muscle. You don't really need that supplement, guys, and I'll touch that on the end. But the reason why we focus on that with protein, and it comes to putting on muscle mass or retaining your muscle mass. So if you're trying to lose weight, if you want to retain your muscle that you have, you also need to be strategic with how you do so. So the reason why is because leucine, he's the big dog, the amino acid for putting on muscle. So you need to have him strategically throughout the day, okay? So if you're a person who just has oats in the morning and you have a banana for a snack, and then you have, I don't know, a salad sandwich, and then your afternoon snack's another piece of fruit, and then your dinner, not much protein is there. So what's happening there is you're not giving your body the ability to make more muscle, which kind of sucks if you're doing a challenge, if you want to put on muscle, because what's the point? You're not fueling yourself to give the body the best adaptation through your training sessions to do so, all right? So that leucine threshold, for example, is 1 to 3 grams, which ends up falling into that 20 to 40 grams that you require every couple of hours, all right? So hence why we do say breakfast, lunch, and dinner, as well as snacks is ideal, because you're going to be hitting those, points where your body needs some more food, which also means that you need some more protein. Now, if you said to me, Tay, what if I'm a shift worker and I'm a construction worker and I can only eat, 4 times a day? That's okay. It just means that you're going to have bigger protein bouts, and you don't necessarily need to have snacks. So instead of having a female, for example, might be 40 for their breakfast with protein, 10 for their snack, 30 to 40, 10, 30 to 40, what you might see is 40, 40, 40, 40, or 50, 50, depending what your requirements need to be. So you don't need to be that OCD with it. It's again about being strategic to make it suit your lifestyle, but you can start to see, once we start being better with your distribution of your macros, particularly protein, you're going to benefit from that, not only from a strength perspective, but feeling fuller for longer. So who has protein and then a protein-based meal and they feel pretty satisfied? Whoever has Brumby's bakery white bread with butter and they feel like they can have more than one slice, right? What do you think the missing factor is there? Protein, yeah? So when we're not saying you have to have protein with every meal, okay? I'm not saying that you need to do that, but when you have one piece of white bread, it's just carbs, nothing wrong with that, but your body's blood sugar levels spike and then it drops really quickly because it gets broken down super quickly. But protein keeps you fuller for longer, which is beneficial if your goal is fat loss, because if you eat more protein throughout the day and couple it with carbohydrates, you can start to see why you start to become more fuller and you're not snacking on shit. Because if you're that 3 p.m. slump in the afternoon and you're going for that lolly jar, I'd probably be like, it's got nothing to do with that. Let's have a look at your food that you've consumed at the start of the day, particularly if you train first thing in the morning, all right? Because if you train first thing in the morning, you're naturally gonna be a little bit more hungrier because you've trained, and then that's gonna titrate down. But if you're a person who trains in the afternoon, not saying you don't need carbs in the morning, but we would just facilitate your carbs a little bit more throughout the afternoon, if that makes sense. So fats are another macronutrient that are really important, and I want to put you back to the start. Can anyone remember how many calories per gram fat has? 9. Yeah. So it's well done. Yeah, everyone's listening. It has over double the amount of calories. Okay, so I find it interesting when people come to me and they're like, "Oh, Tay, I'm really scared of carbs because it's I gain weight." But with fat, you look at their diet, but I just still can't lose weight because, I'm not eating any carbohydrates, and they have a high fat diet. Now, how's the only way I can lose weight? By a calorie deficit, all right? So if you're still eating a diet that's high in fat, moderate protein, low carb, and you're still in a surplus, guess what? You're still gonna gain weight, all right? Because it's got nothing to do with the macros as per se, it's because you're over consuming. The thing with carbs, which I'll talk about in regards to fat, guys, is when people do pull carbs from your diet, what do you notice immediately on the scales? It'll probably go down, correct? But the reason why it goes down, unless you're in a calorie deficit, that makes sense, but if you're not in a calorie deficit, you've just cut your carbs, what will happen is you'll see a weight loss reduction from water. Okay, so for every gram of carb we consume, we hold 3 grams of water with it. So when I get my lovely keto dieters who come in and see me and they're like, oh, but I lost like 5 kilos of fat in a week. I'm like, mate, if we could lose 5 kilos of fat in a week, we would have an obesity epidemic to begin with, because it'd be easy to lose the weight and then put it back on, lose the weight, put it back on. All they've lost is technically water weight, and they would have lost some fat, don't get me wrong, because they're probably in a calorie deficit. But then once they've lost that water weight and their body's adjusted, they're like, oh, I can't lose any more weight, and I've got fuck all calories, I'm eating a high fat diet and I hate my life. All right, because it's not sustainable. So that's what you've got to look at when we're looking at your fats and that sort of stuff. I'm not saying fats are bad, because they definitely serve a purpose, but you want to make sure that when we're distributing your foods, that you're doing it in a way that is sustainable. Because if you've ever done a keto diet, guys, it's great for fucking 2 days and then it's shit. All right. Even if you love mayonnaise, you get over that shit real quick. So when we're talking about fat, it's important to the fact that they help us in terms of feeling fuller for longer. They do have beneficial fats, so it's really good that we do need those for our health and well-being, because they help protect us against cardiovascular disease and those types of things. So those beneficial fats that we're talking about is polyunsaturated or unsaturated fats, okay? So the avocados, nuts, seeds, all those types of things. When we're talking about not the best fats, we're talking about saturated fats. So saturated fats are the ones that increase your risk of cardiovascular disease. They're the ones such as, your donuts and all your good foods, the ones that taste really nice, and animal fats and those types of things. Now, it's not saying you can't have those in your diet, but when you're looking at your total fat distribution for the day, it should only come from 10% of saturated fats, is what your fat total should be. So coconut oil, for example, if anyone has coconut oil, it is not good for you. When people say to me, oh, it helps me facilitate fat loss quicker, I just say to you, the only way you can facilitate fat loss, mate, is by a calorie deficit, okay? It's not some oil that's gonna do it. It's not some fat burner, unless you get Duramine from the doctor, and that's a load of shit. You shouldn't be taking that. So when we're looking at that in general, saturated fats can still serve their purpose. Like I use coconut oil when I'm using things as salads or chicken, because it goes nicer and that type of thing. But if I'm dousing all my food in coconut oil and I'm like, oh, it's better for me because I'm on a low carb diet, I'm gonna lose fat, and then I go to the doctor and they're like, oh, your cholesterol's high. Oh, I wonder why. All right, because saturated fat at the end of the day, too much of it, again, the dose is the poison, it's going to increase your likelihood of that. And we do see that with ketogenic dieters. So they go on a low carb diet and they get their bloods done, and afterwards it's really highly likely that you will have an increase in your saturated fat in terms of your LDL and your bad cholesterol. The only reason I harp on about this is the only person really, or individuals who should be doing a ketogenic diet, are people who have epilepsy. And the reason why is because with epilepsy, your brain function requires carbohydrates, and if you do have that, what happens is too much carbs actually increase your risk of seizures. Okay, so by pulling carbs from your diet, reduces your brain's activity, which means you're less likely to have seizures. All right, so that's, yes, a clinically medical-based strategy for that condition. Haven't got epilepsy, don't do it. Okay, let's just work on your relationship with your food and your sustainability of your food. Like I said, it's important for cellular growth and hormonal activity. Too low fat isn't good for you, just like too much fat in your diet isn't good for you either, okay? So you've got to find that happy medium. And it can be used as a good strategy too, like for example, if you don't, a non-training day, if you don't really need carbs or you don't really want carbs at dinner, you have protein, fats, and lots of vegetables, and that's going to keep you fuller for longer. So we're not saying not to avoid them completely, obviously, but the dose is a poison because it does have the highest calorie per gram. So your micronutrients, guys. So I like to think of your micronutrients as your spark plugs to your metabolism, and your macros as the structure of your car, okay? So a lot of people only ever focus on their macros or their calories when they're doing a challenge, because, not saying they're not important, but that's all they factor in. So then I get people coming into clinic and I'm like, oh, how come you're not eating fruit? And you're like, oh, my 100-calorie banana doesn't suit my macros or my calories, but this protein bar that's got 27 ingredients and half the shit you can't even pronounce does. So you can start to see, well, there's a problem. I'm not saying you can't have either of those, but when fear-mongering comes in and you don't want to eat a banana, and a banana's far better because it's got micronutrients as well, not processed shit, you can start to see that there's a bit of problem with your relationship with food. Both can serve their purpose, but you don't want to start that, I can't have this is good food, this is bad food, because there's no such thing as good or bad, unless you're eating bad foods, and they tend to be things that are toxic to you. So toxic mushrooms, or things that you have a medical issue with. So for example, if you're eating gluten and you've got celiac disease, then it's obviously food that is not good for you, it's bad for you because it can cause, health problems. So micronutrients, we have 40 essential, micro meaning smaller amount, say trace elements, so we don't need as much of them, but we still need a lot of color. So if you're a person who just eats green beans and broccoli, we've got a problem, all right? Because that's just one color, okay? And it's not enticing just eating broccoli and rice and chicken for dinner, unless you're all for that, but I'm certainly not. But you want to try and make sure you have as much vibrant color as you can, because there's not one single food source that's going to provide you with all your micronutrients. And you say to me, oh, but Taylor, I take a multivitamin, so that suits. And I'm like, well, we need to work on your relationship with food and cook your vegetables and stop being lazy. All right, so there's a main reason why, unless, for example, you can't tolerate veggies or for whatever reason that might be, then yes, those, multivitamins serve their purpose. But at the end of the day, most of our food should be coming from wholesome food sources, because your body can digest that a lot efficiently, opposed to micronutrients. Again, micronutrients, if you take too much of it, that will become toxic to your body. So if you're already on a good amount of, vegetables and that sort of stuff, and you're just taking a multivitamin because you thought it'll be good for you, but you have a sound diet, you can see why there's problems, because it'll be toxic to you because there's too much of it. All right, just like, has anyone ever eaten, I'm not saying this happened to me, it has happened to a lot of my athletes, eaten like too much sweet potato and like, oh, my skin's going orange. Literally, unless you like fake tan, then that's fine, but literally that becomes a problem because you've got too much beta carotene, which is a type of vitamin that your body has, and then your skin color naturally changes because all you're doing is eating orange vegetables. All right, so you do want to be mindful. That's a very minor thing. There's lots of worse things that can happen, obviously, but you want to be, making sure that you have adequate intake. It is necessary for our metabolism, obviously, tissue function, and excess, like I said, is too much amounts isn't great for us. But the biggest issue where a lot of people go wrong is they're not eating enough calcium, because they're excluding dairy products because they think dairy is bad, because they're being told by a naturopath, unless there's a naturopath in this room, I'm not saying that's bad, but that they can't have dairy, gluten, or wheat because of whatever reason, okay? So please be mindful if you're seeing an allied health professional, because they are still health professionals, that your evidence source is good. Because has anyone ever done an IgG test or a blood test and they're like, I've got this list of food and I can't eat it? Yeah. So that is an unorthodox testing mechanism, which means it has not got enough science to prove that that's necessary. Same with hair follicle testing or anything like that. Not necessary. The only way you can ever get told if you have an issue with food is you actually go see an immunologist and an allergist, where they'll prick you with certain things. But that IgG testing is inaccurate, because what it shows you in your blood sources are the foods that are quite prominent. All right? So if you're like, oh my God, I can't have dairy, I knew that. I'm like, well, you have dairy sources every goddamn day. That's probably why. And is it a placebo effect as to why you think you have an issue with dairy? Or is it just because I just told you now that you have an issue with dairy? Okay, so there's reasons why, because if you start to eliminate those food sources and it's not medically warranted for evidence-based interventions, you're gonna have bigger problems. All right, because then you're gonna start being, have issues with malnourishment in terms of your vitamins and minerals. I can keep harping on about that, but I think you guys get the point. So when we're then looking at it when it comes to your nutrition guides and everything you do from a daily basis, who reckons right now, if they're looking at their breakfast, like, oh, I tell you I could probably have a bit more carbs, or I tell you I could probably have a bit more protein or micronutrients, because Special K in milk is a good option, but there's not really a lot of, micronutrients in that. So who reckons that's them? Yeah. So when we're looking at our breakfast builder, guys, we do want to make sure that we're having, carbs, proteins, fats, fruits, and vegetables as much as we can, okay? Like, I'm not going to say if you're having cereal in the morning that you need to have a side of mushrooms, spinach, and zucchini. That's just weird. Unless you like doing that, that's fine. But what we do want to make sure is that we're covering those bases, because if you have those 4 factors into your diet on a daily basis, you're probably going to be hitting all those things that you require. Like I said, carbs for fueling your brain, regulating your blood sugar levels, appetite hormones, growth and development, protein, building muscle mass, regulating appetite, satiety over the day, and managing body fat levels. Fats, like I said, satiety, immune function, and fat soluble nutrients, and then obviously our fruits and vegetables. Now, this is why I'm saying this, guys, because you can have someone who consumes 2,000 calories and they're just winging it, but then just hitting the macros and whatever they need. Then you have someone who's on 2,000 calories, that's nutrient periodization, in and around training, having good amounts of carbs, fats, and proteins. Who do you think is going to have better body composition? A or B? B. Because there's so much more to macros and nutrition than just making sure you hit those totals, okay? Good example is when I competed. I used to compete at weightlifting and fitness modeling. So I had to diet 25 weeks straight to get up on stage. Now, the more body fat you have, the easier it is to lose to begin with. I naturally don't have a lot of body fat, so it took me longer to get down to the requirements that I needed. And if I was a person who fixated just on the scales, I would have been heavily disappointed. The reason why is because fat mass and weight loss are two totally different things. So as females, particularly in here, if you're getting disheartened because you're not seeing that scale drop, but you're doing strength and conditioning as an exercise, quit and go be a runner, all right? Because muscle mass and the density that it has will make you weigh more on the scales, okay? So when I competed, I weighed in at 54 kilos at my start of my prep. 25 weeks straight, nothing off plan, not saying that you need to do that, it's just a different type of sport, right? I got on the scales at the end of the prep and I was 52 kilos. So for a half a year, I'd only lost 2 kilos. Now, if you were worried about weight, you can see that you're like, holy shit, why am I even bothering, okay? But if you saw my fat levels in terms of my body fat from part A to part B, you'd be like, oh wow, you seem like you've lost more than 2 kilos, okay? Because I can make you lose weight overnight, just don't eat. But that means weight loss, or sit in a sauna and you've lost weight, all right? But that doesn't mean you've lost fat mass, okay? So fat mass is excess calories over time, is what causes us to have higher body fat levels. So if you think you can get rid of it overnight by not eating, or you think you can get rid of it by sitting in a sauna, that's not how dieting works, okay? It's an accumulation of excess calories over time. So when you jump on that scale on a Monday morning, you're like, holy shit, I've gained weight. You jump on it the next day, you're like, oh, I've gone down. Oh, I've gained weight. Oh, I've gone down. You can see why a weekly average is more important, because your weight will fluctuate. All right, and if you don't want to have any muscle mass, I'm not saying that runners are bad, please don't interpret that, but you're more likely to lose muscle if you do endurance style for a longer time, because you're not doing anything that retains muscle mass. All right, so you've got to try and get your head around that when it comes to the scales. And it's quite hard because females are very driven by scale weight from a numerical value, but it doesn't determine your self-worth, all right? So you need to focus on that, because there's heaps of things that can affect it. So if I had grilled the night before, I'm like, yeah, I've had a great week, and I step on the scales, I'm like, holy shit, I've gone up a kilo. But all I've done is been in a deficit for the whole week. It's because last night I had a sodium, that's probably 3 times the amount of my sodium that I need in one day, because burgers and chips are good, all right? But that's gonna affect my weight the next day. So you need to be smart with how you're looking at things and focusing. At the end of the day, it's a slow progress. Your dieting should always kind of be like this. It should never be this and then this. Because the longer it takes you to come up, the longer it takes you to come down. And that going up is really bad relationship with food. That's gonna be shit when it comes down, all right? So you wanna make sure that what you're doing is sustainable for yourself. So when we're looking at examples, I got my little tangents across like with this sort of stuff, guys, so I'll come back and hopefully you guys will still follow. But when we're looking at your breakfast, and then we're looking at how it should look like in a day, I know you guys can't see the finer details, but your one on the left is ideal. So that's a good example of what we should be having. So for example, the lighter ones are the carbs. So if I'm training in the morning, depending on what my goals are for my training session, okay? Because it's not necessarily, if you're coming in fasted and you don't really care about performance, that's okay, but if you care about performance, you need to come in with some sort of fuel. So good amount of carbs. My breakfast has a good amount of carbs, as well as some protein and some decent fats. And then I've got carbohydrates evenly throughout the day, but still within my calorie goals and my macro goals. And I'm still gonna focus on weight loss and fat loss. So if I'm doing that, and that's my ideal, I'll still achieve those goals, okay? Because everything's kind of evenly distributed. You can see that my breakfast after my training session has more carbs. Why do we think that is? Yeah, refueling, and I just had my hardest training session. So my post-training session meal needs to be slightly higher for that, okay? Because I've just trained. If I'm a person in the like this is an example of what most people do, needs work. So in the morning, I'm fasting, my breakfast has a little bit of carbs, a little bit of protein, some fats, morning tea, there's nothing, lunch, a little bit of carbs, afternoon tea, nothing, whopping amount of carbs at dinner because I'm starving because I decided not to have any carbs throughout the day really. And then supper is a shitload of ice cream because I'm like, well, whatever, I'm still hungry. If this person's still within their calorie deficit, they will still achieve their goals, but their body composition is going to be slightly skewed or probably decreased because it's not really suited. But I'm going to suggest that this person's over their calories, and also the distribution of food isn't great. So the one on the left, we're nutrient periodizing, which means we're giving you your macros and your micros where you need them most. So we're starting off the day well. Remember that old saying, eat like a king for breakfast, eat like a princess for dinner? In this scenario, it's okay. I'm not saying it applies to everyone because that's not politically correct and everyone's politically correct these days. So when we start, I'm started training here, so my intake's higher. I'm less active throughout the day, so it makes sense that I don't need as much carbohydrates, correct? But if I'm doing it this way, what's happening here is I'm training, I've got no food and heaps of food by the time I go to bed. So you're naturally giving yourself more food when you're going to bed, and unless you're planning on running a marathon, your body doesn't really need to do much with that food. So it would be better to have it more distributed at the front end, right? If your person trains in the afternoon, that changes a bit. So this, maybe not that much carbohydrates, but you know, it would be similar to what your breakfast would need. So you still need, but you would still make sure you have carbs throughout the day. Do you know what I mean? You just like having a decent amount, some for lunch, and then your dinner is going to increase because that's when you're training. Your post-training meal becomes your dinner, all right? You can see that there's no need for protein shakes after training. Okay, because if I'm going from a main, I finished training and I'm going into a main meal, I'm going to be getting my protein requirements there, okay? People say, well, you know, post-training I need my protein shake within 30 minutes. If you train fasted in the morning, you've had no protein since the night before, you don't need to get it within 30 minutes, but you do probably need to focus on getting that in pretty quick because you haven't had any protein since the night before, okay? But if you're a person who's had, you know, fueled your session in the morning, you might have had a bit of yogurt and, I don't know, banana, then your need for your post-training nutrition doesn't need to be as quick because you've had something prior. So remember, the dose is the poison. If I'm having, like if I just finished training and I've had a post-training shake here, then breakfast, and then go on throughout the day, I've had double hits of protein, all right? Remember, you're not gonna turn into Arnold Schwarzenegger by taking too much protein unless you take drugs. But what we wanna focus on with that is that the dose is a poison again. I've just given myself excess protein that I don't really need. So instead of having 40 grams of protein within that time frame, I've probably given myself 70 in the same 3 to 4 hour window. Not really necessary. Why work harder when you can work smarter, all right? So it'd be more beneficial to have the extra carbohydrates that you've probably had because you're like, oh, not had because you're like, I just need to get protein in to help me with my muscles rebuilding, all right? So if you said to me, Tay, putting this into practice, what are some good options for brekkie or, you know, even snacks and that type of thing? Overnight oats are a great option because a lot of time people say, oh, I'm really busy in the morning so I don't have a lot of time to get into breakfast. But this literally takes 5 minutes the night before. So obviously you've got some carbs, protein, healthy fats, and some color. I wouldn't put the berries in overnight. I mean, you can, they just go soggy. I'd probably do that first thing in the morning. So that is a good example. You've got some complex carbs, lots of color, and some protein, like I said. Healthy fats can be anything. That's just LSA because it's providing you linseed, sunflower seed, and almond. But you could do peanut butter if you wanted to, almond butter, cashew butter, nut butter in general. Another example, if you want more of a savory, so you can do healthy fats, you could do salmon with that one if you wanted to, so you can see the bit of color coming in a different variety of your foods. But we've all got that same consistency. If you're a person who says, I don't have time to cut up my vegetables, you do have time, it's just how much of a priority things are to you. I'm not saying nutrition needs to be 100% priority, because let's be honest, it never really is. But if yours is about 50%, it's not about making it 100, it's just about 60%, 65%. So you're working towards that consistency. Because you went from 50 to 100, I'm just setting you up for failure, okay? Because you haven't learned those behaviors needed to achieve your weight loss. Because at the end of the day, yes, it's definitely got things to do with food, but it's more your behaviors that set people off opposed to their nutrition. People get motivated for a challenge for the first 2 weeks because they're like, fuck yeah, this is great. And nutrition is one of those things you can't see instantaneous results, whereas training, you're more likely to, okay? So everyone's more motivated to rock up to their training session sometimes, unless it's really early in the morning, then you might need some coffee. But do you see, it's easier to do that because you feel good straight away. You're like, oh, I feel like shit, and then you finish training, you're like, oh, I feel great. Whereas in nutrition, you don't get that instantaneous hit of endorphins straight away. You're like, I love eating my vegetables, this is great, all right? I mean, I hope you guys have that by the end of the challenge, but it takes time, and that's, as humans, we're extremists and we're also very lazy inherently. Charles Darwin theory, right? In terms of the fact the weakest link always loses. But small changes, if you can do that the night before, you prep it the night before, you make it a habit. Because whatever you do with the challenge, the reason why people do so well is because they're acute habits, because most of the time you're not actually addressing your bigger problems. So when you're doing things like, you know, cutting out your carbs is an acute habit, you can do that for a period of time and then you reincorporate it and you have a binging issue, okay? Whereas if you can cut out your vegetables the night before, you make your breakfast the night before, you do that every day, it can be a habit that becomes ingrained. That's saying it takes 28 days to break a habit is bullshit, because it comes down, there's no evidence for that. It comes down to whether you've created an acute habit or you've created a chronic habit. Acute habit is like, oh fuck, what's an acute habit? I decided not to have vegetables in my breakfast, now I'm having vegetables, so it's easy to do that. Chronic habit is I've constantly learned to brush my teeth, you know, morning and night. Or I've binged my entire life because I have an emotional stressor with work, so I come home, open the fridge, I eat a cookie, and I do that now even if I'm not stressed. This habit is going to be harder to break than this habit, but that's a good habit. But you get my point of where we're trying to go with that, okay? So another ones, you make things healthy too. Like, you're not saying you can't not have unhealthy pancakes, but you can have ways that the pancakes are healthier and you're hitting all your micronutrients as well as your macros. You're adding in some bananas, obviously healthy fats, protein, and color again. So when we're looking at from a performance plate, guys, you guys are doing really well, but you want to make sure, like when you're doing it, if it's a low intensity day, this is what we're focusing on. So as you can see, you've got carbs and your proteins and lots of vegetables on that matter, okay? So you can see that distribution is mostly veggies, not as much carbs, because you're not training, you don't necessarily need the energy, all right? As you come to moderate training, so harder training, you can start to see they go into more thirds, so lots more color, a little bit more carbohydrates, and your proteins as well as your fats. Okay, so you can see that changes because my intensity is increasing. Hard training days, so this is like if you're doing over, you know, an hour, double day sessions, CrossFit training, you know, running, all that type of thing. You can see that half my plate becomes carbs because my training is increased. And then color and protein, and then your fats. So you can see that the changing factor there is your carbs based on what you're doing with your training sessions or what you do on a daily basis. If you're a construction worker, obviously, and you're training a lot, then that will vary too, because your activity levels, what you do throughout the day, is more than the everyday individual. Balanced snack example, guys. So this is just a quick overview, slightly more energy dense on the left, on the right, sorry. So you've got carbs, proteins, and fats in most of them. You can see there's a lot of variety. You're not eating just carrot sticks and hummus. So you can have good, I mean, that's a great snack, but you can also have options that are a little bit more filling and more calorie dense as it goes on. So lots of color, lots of variety. There's even popcorn in there, do you know what I mean? So you don't have to be restricted to just eating vegetable sticks, which is what most people get told. Quick example of these guys is swap it, don't stop it. So a lot of people are like, oh, I can't have mayonnaise, I'm not going to have, you know, the light mayonnaise, but we know at the end of the day it comes down to the calories. The one on the left, if you're looking as a percentage, always think of it at 100 grams as a percentage, right? So the traditional mayo, you can make swaps without having to cut it out. So the traditional mayo, when you're looking at it, it's 550 calories. You're not going to have 100 grams of that. I'm just giving you an example. But the one on the left is 114. Which one's going to cause the weight loss? Why? Because it has less calories. Doesn't matter about the macros, unless you're focusing on like diabetes or anything like that. But you can see at the end of the day, you don't need to cut things out completely. Next one is one of my good examples, those well naturally coconut bar things. They was like, oh, they're great because it's got no added sugar. I'm like, yeah, but it's 220 calories. Yeah, but yeah, it's better for me because it's not processed and it's got higher fat. I'm like, it'll also make you shit a lot because it's got a lot of stevia or fake sugars in there. So if you've got a sensitive stomach, that's a problem. But this one on the left, you know, those summer rolls, those are brilliant. It's only 188 calories. Which would you go for? Fuck that one off. We're going to go for the one on the right, all right? So it's all about making sure marketing doesn't hit you guys. The other one, your Farmer Joe granola, because everyone loves paleo. That's 620 calories. Good old Carmen's, which yes, it has higher carbohydrates, but what causes the weight gain? Excess calories. That one's only 423. All right, and it's also cheaper. That one's really paying a lot just because of nuts. Training nutrition quickly, guys. So in training nutrition, we're going over it. So your pre-training nutrition that we want to focus on is predominantly carbohydrates. Fueling effectively for that. So the carbs that we want to be focusing on is ones such as easily digestible. So things like crackers, you know, bananas, fruits, piece of toast, fruit purees, dates, those types of examples, because they're easily digestible. A bowl of rice before training, even though it's carbohydrates, it's not a fast absorbing carb, which means it's going to sit in your stomach and you're going to have issues where you're going to probably have to go to the toilet, or bouts of issues like that sort of thing to focus on. Okay, so it's important to pay attention to what we're fueling ourselves with. Or juice, for example, if you can't handle anything in your stomach, that's also another good example. So these are there, or crumpets is a good one. Low fiber cereal, but if none of you guys are getting in fruits, do not go for that cereal because it's the dose of the poison. The processed foods tend to come in for more my athletes, but if you really suck at getting fruit in, that's when I would say it's more important, because at the end of the day, think of your nutrition as a cupcake. The batter is really important, so your 2 serves of veg, 5 serves of vegetables to keep you healthy. The icing is your pre-training nutrition, supplements and all that sort of stuff. If you haven't got your daily nutrition sorted, you ain't going for that icing, all right? And that's where a lot of people go wrong. They're like, oh, but I have cereal before training because you said so. I'm like, yeah, but I also said you need to have fruit, and you've got no fruit in your diet. So you don't deserve the cereal. Does that make sense? Because your general health and well-being needs to come first. So when it comes to overall understanding, guys, it's really important to understand there's so much more to an equation and macros and calories. We also want to make sure you're fueling yourself adequately and not under-fueling. And making sure that you're sustaining yourself around your training, and making sure that whatever you do from a nutritional standpoint, not saying, you could be doing keto and it could really work, that's fine, but as long as it's sustainable and creates a healthy outcome long term for you with your nutrition, then that's all that matters, okay? And you don't create disordered eating or eating disorders, because that's quite prominent with nutrition, where people start cutting out things because they see results but the wrong way of those results, if that makes sense. Has anyone got any questions so far for that? Everyone just kind of looks a bit dazed. So much information, I do apologize. But Bite Right, guys, if you guys haven't seen Bite Right before, it's my app that I've created from scratch. And it's the only app on the market that does what it does, because it's been created by evidence-based practitioners. So what it is, it's a meal plan app that designs your meal plan for you based on your requirements, so your height, weight, training goals, vice versa, your exclusions. So for example, if you don't like dairy, you're vegan, anything like that, that takes into consideration. It then creates you a meal plan to suit those requirements. That meal plan can be swapped in and out. So what that means is that you can have your, say for example, I decide to give you eggs on toast and you're like, I don't have time for that. What will happen is that your meals will swap based on those requirements that meal has given you, okay? So your carbs, fats and proteins and macros. It's probably, without being biased, one of the more informative ones on the App Store and Google Store, because it's the only one that gets added recipes each week. So when I first started Bite Right, there was only 450 recipes. There's now 2,500, and that's only been 1 year. All right, so we're constantly updating that. We have a chat function, so you're speaking to myself. Luckily, I love my job, right? 24/7, and then you also make sure you have access to articles and discovery. Now that's the standard. So with what you guys have got access to for the challenge, so there's 2 types of pricing for this. So I'm going to give you guys a week free on the 7-day free trial, which means you're going to get access to the premium, which is the more expensive one. However, after that 7 days, you guys are going to go down to the discovery option, which has all been included and paid for. But what that is it just gives you the recipes and the articles that you have. So it will still be suited to your calorie requirements, in terms of the fact that when you first sign in with it, you will see, you can search recipes, and when you search your recipes, what will happen, I'm hoping this is going to play. Oh, there we go. There, so for example, I've chosen 450 calories there, or we might change it. Let's just go for, I don't know what that was, 450 or 480. These are all the recipes that suit my requirements, because when you first sign in on the app, you guys will be asked all those, okay? So you can search it by calories, you can search it by chicken, vice versa. And if you said to me, Tay, well, how much calories do I need? That's why I've given you the 7-day premium for free, because you guys will see what your breakfast, lunch, dinner calories are, okay? After that, you'll get downgraded just to the recipe discovery page, where you guys can search everything based on your requirements, or for example, exclusions. I've turned off my exclusions there, as you can see in that top left corner here, because the only exclusions I don't really like is dairy and prawns, but I will still eat that. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just don't particularly, like if you exclude dairy, it's going to exclude every source of dairy, because we have people on there who are dairy intolerant, or lactose intolerant, for example. So that's why we do that. Sometimes if you're gluten intolerant, you might just leave that, but then there'll be gluten in there, but you might swap that to gluten-free pasta opposed to pasta, if that makes sense. So it gives you a lot of easy recipes. When you click in on a recipe, it's 4 per serve. So those macros are based on what that is. But if you've got a family and you're like, I've got to cook for 5 people, we've now given the option of being able to hit the plus button for 5 serves or how many serves you want, and it'll multiply and do the math for you. So you don't need to worry about it, you just got to cook it. And they're really easy recipes because I don't particularly like cooking, and I've tried every single one of these recipes, okay? So, and it's also time factored. So you can also search meal time if you want to. See how it says meal time? You can click on that and you can search through breakfast, lunch, snacks, desserts. You can search through time, which is down the bottom. But the biggest factor I want you guys to pay attention to is when you sign up. Hopefully you haven't signed up already, but when you sign up, you need to type in the code Pinnacle Fitness 22, okay? So please write that down because everyone in this room will have access to that. And then you'll have the free trial for the premium, and then you guys will go down to Discovery. Discovery is still an awesome option, guys. You still get access to the recipes and stuff. You just don't get the premium plan. If you do wish to have that during that challenge, that's fine. But that's going to be additional expense for you guys, okay? So it's $1.99 per week for the this one, which you guys are already taken care of, or the more expensive one is the $9.99, okay? For this challenge, I would say focus on obviously Discovery so you get used to that sort of thing. And then afterwards, if you wish, you can sign up to it, because Buy Right's not made for challenges. I mean, it is, but it's made for sustainability. So I've had clients on there from last year who she's lost over 17 kilos so far, just because she stayed on it, because she likes that flexibility. Well, that was just a price guide, just so you guys have a better understanding. But yeah, so hopefully you guys have enjoyed that. If you have any concerns or questions, when you do have that Discovery box, we've also given you access to us to chat to. But we're not going to give you evidence, like we're not going to give you feedback. You say, oh, Tay, what should I be if I need 600 calories, blah, 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 because we don't know anything about your background unless you become that premium member. So we'll help you through to a degree, but keep in mind the Discovery's there more for like, oh, Tay, this one has chicken, can I change that to seafood? You know, that type of thing, because it's not going to affect your calories too much. How did everyone find that? Good? Did they learn something? What's the biggest thing we took home? Apart from we don't like keto diet. Yeah, well done. Yeah. Anything else? Who wasn't doing a pre-trainer is probably going to do a pre-training now if their goal is a bit more performance-based? Yeah. Cool. Who likes the idea of having crumpets for a pre-trainer? Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, guys. But like I said, if you need me for any reason, you can either contact me through Nick or through the app, or you can also contact me via email or my Instagram.